last year we did a conference in Kisumu with the title Spotlight on E-Mobility. Well, you all know why this year there will not be a physical conference, but as the E-Mobility program of Siemens Foundation, together with various partners, was still and is still busy working and producing lots of interesting results, we decided to host Spotlight series online. And today I'm really happy to welcome you to the first of those series with a focus on environmental impact. So the e-mobility program is like crucial for Siemens Foundation, and we are partnering with different organizations, for example, GIZ, in a series of to generate data and studies. And we have as well a partnership with P4G on the proof of concept of technology and solutions in Western Kenya. So today we have Rolf Huber, the Managing Director of Siemens Foundation, giving some words of greeting, and afterwards we're starting with the topic. So Rolf, happy to have you here. Over to you.
Okay, then I do the greeting. Let me welcome you all to this very first session of our new virtual discussion round, as Mark just explained, of the Siemens e-mobility program. And a bit more than a year ago, I had the chance to meet a lot of you, or many of you, or some of you, I don't know who is out there today, in person on our Spotlight or an e-mobility conference in Kisumu. And I still recall the lively discussions we had in the breakout rooms there. I remember also that some of us put together all of our physical strengths to lift up our electric cargo bikes up the stairs to the conference area of the Acacia Hotel in Kisumu. Well, that was fun. It was our first ever conference on e-mobility. We covered a lot of different topics: e-mobility in rural settings, urban e-mobility policies, and in institutional drivers, as well as local manufacturing and, of course, jobs. As a foundation working in this field, we are absolutely convinced that e-mobility plays a key role for economic development in Africa, for job creation, for the fight against poverty, and for the fight against water pollution or air pollution. Mobility is crucial for development of markets and countries. It is crucial for the access to healthcare or for the access to markets. That's why we as the Siemens Stiftung are focusing on e-mobility for productive use. Today, unfortunately, or luckily, we have the technology. It will be a different conference. Of course, we cannot sit together physically and discuss the various knowledges and experiences you all had and have collected in the meantime. But Mara was very busy to see that this new virtual session is also a successful format. And we want to focus in the future on always one spot and topic only, so that it is digestible. And today we start with the environmental aspect. As I mentioned, air pollution, water pollution, carbon-free traffic, charging infrastructure with renewable energy, but also the local production of vehicles and developing of local value chains are the topics. Today's session builds up on a research study that was made possible through a grant financing by the German Development Corporation, GIZ. We joined forces to focus on crucial areas for e-mobility in Kenya. So I'm delighted to welcome Hermann Kwoba from the GIZ and Beryl Ajwang from EED Advisors today as our expert speakers. So let's focus and let's look forward to a lively discussion and to interesting new aspects of e-mobility in Africa. I want to thank you all in advance already for your interest and dedication in this important, innovative, and fun technology of e-mobility. So let's start. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rolf. I quickly want to introduce you in the agenda for today. This webinar will be recorded, so we will stop the recording after the presentations of the two experts so that you can pose your questions and answers more freely. If you have questions, please use the question and answer function. And like after the two presentations, first there will be Hermann Kwoba from GIZ and then Beryl Ajwang from EED. We will go in the discussion. So now I would like to ask Hermann with the first presentation.
Thank you very much, Mara. Please let me know in case the audio is not very good. Otherwise, I will just keep going. Also not able to share my screen yet. Mara?
I gave you permission.
Not yet possible. If I cannot do it, then you might have to do it from your end.
Can you try again?
Not possible. Okay,
Alex, can you jump in? So Alex will share for you. Maybe you can already start with introducing who you are.
Yes, that works. While Alex is doing that. Great. So my name is Hermann Kwoba. I work for GIZ, and I'm based in Kenya. We are running a project called Advancing Transport and Climate Strategies. Or maybe you can move to the next slide. And what we are doing is we are cooperating directly with the State Department of Transport in Kenya to support, broadly speaking, the State Department to meet its climate change obligations as set out in the National Climate Change Action Plan and also the Climate Change Act of 2016. You will realize that most of our actions since 2016, as far as the project is concerned, has been focused on these two key documents. And primarily, the first year or so of our project was focused on supporting the department meet one of the key requirements in the Climate Change Act, which is to set up a climate change coordination unit, what you can see on the screen called the Climate Change Desk. And this is a requirement that every state department within the country needs to do, or state department and agency needs to do something like this. The project has also had a very key focus on capacity enhancement and scenario development, and here has been about prioritizing mitigation actions for the transport sector. And this is essentially how GIZ has come into focus to work on electric mobility, because I will highlight this later on, because electric mobility is one of the key priority mitigation action for the country. While you move to the next slide, the project has been running for about 2 years now. Almost 4 years, from 2017 coming to a close next year in 2021. And this slide was just meant to give you a broader overview of the situation as far as transport and its contribution to emission is concerned. For us to be able to meet our global target within the Paris Agreement of 2 degrees, under 2 degrees Celsius, the transport sector has to aggressively carry out an about mitigation actions. And this essentially, based on a very rough estimation, is to reduce emissions by about 75% of the current levels. Moving on to the next slide. So there's a lot of work that still needs to be done around this. Now, the project, as I mentioned, has had a key focus on data. I will show you a few of what the analysis we've done, and has also been, as I mentioned, setting up a climate change coordination unit. And this has essentially focused a lot on institutional building and capacity enhancement. And as I mentioned also, we are focused on 2 key documents: the National Climate Change Action Plan, which we have supported to revise. You can see there that this one was between 2013 and 2017. but now we have a new regime, 2018-2022, and the Climate Change Act of 2016, which has a lot of requirements that every sector and every state agency needs to meet. Moving on. Just wanted to highlight, as I told you, we've done a lot of work on data, and I wanted to highlight the profile of the transport sector in Kenya. My presentation is going to focus a lot on the context, the Kenyan context. And so far, according to records, we have about 3.2 million vehicles recorded in the country. Almost half of this is 2- and 3-wheelers, motorbikes, and what we traditionally call tuk-tuks. And then we have motor vehicles making about 1.7 million. And then there's a rough estimate that we have roughly around 350 electric vehicles, give or take. This number is still being certified, but this is what we roughly estimate, also talking to the SDOT, the State Department. This is the number that they have estimated to be of electric vehicles in the country. And then we also did an estimation of what percentage of the vehicles that have been registered in the country are still in use. You realize in Kenya, we don't deregister vehicles at all. So based on survival rates and a few other analyses we did together with the University of Nairobi, we estimated about 70% of vehicles that have been registered in the country are still on the road. And also of late, there is a very high rates of increase, particularly of motorcycles annually. There's an average number of about 150,000, and it's growing to almost 200,000 for motorcycles, and for vehicles, it's roughly around 80 to 90,000. And also based on an analysis of emissions in the country, we realized of all the subsectors within the transport sector, that is aviation, rail, maritime, and road, over 80% of emissions in the country come from the road transport primarily. Moving on to the next slide. So this is gives you an idea of the growth over time since 1968 up to around 2018. And you will realize sometimes around 2007, there was an exponential growth of motorcycles in the country. We are hoping that this sort of blue tag will ideally represent the growth of electric vehicles moving forward. For those who have done some, have followed the profile of vehicle growth in the country, you realize that this exponential growth is primarily linked to incentives that are offered for motorcycles, and that is why you see the blue color code indicates motorcycles, and around 2006, that's where the incentives were issued, and that's why there's this high exponential growth around that time. Yep. Now, coming to emissions, as I mentioned, road transport is a significant contributor of emissions in the country. At the moment, around in 2015, Kenya's transport sector emissions were about 13% of the total. But then it's projected that moving forward, it's going to rise to about 17%. And that's a significant contribution, considering that ownership of vehicles in the country is still not very high, although it's rapidly growing, but it's still not as high to lead to this significant number moving forward. And so this is what has led to the discussions that have led to prioritization of a few mitigation actions. And part of this we supported in our project. And the focus has been on trying as much as possible to move people from private modes into public modes of transport, mass transportation modes. And one of the key mitigation action that was proposed broadly is affordable, safe, and efficient public transport. And here, the issue of the bus rapid transport, I know for people who are involved in the transportation discussions in Kenya, might have been a little bit frustrated with the delays in seeing the BRT come to life, but this is an ongoing and I think there's a lot of commitment from the policymaker side to see this through. And there's also discussions of electrification of the SGR and as well extension of the SGR. Primarily, this was from Nairobi to Naivasha and focus also on non-motorized transport and what brings us together today on electric mobility. So this was part of the discussions to see how to make public transport efficient and more affordable. And this is one of the key broader priority mitigation action that has been identified and is included in the National Climate Change Action Plan. If you Google it, National Climate Change Action Plan 2018-2022, you will see all these actions listed. We also have a document called the Mitigation Technical Analysis Report that goes into details, deeper discussions around this priority mitigation action. The other mitigation priority action that was identified is on reduction of fuel consumption and fuel overhead cost. And here issues around efficiency of heavy goods vehicle was identified. And this is one of the actions that has one of the highest mitigation potential in the country. And also discussions around which has been actively pursued a shift of freight from road to rail. The other issue also, as much as these other sectors are not significant contributors to emission, there's also a lot of focus on greening them. And here there's prioritization of actions around low carbon technologies in aviation and maritime sectors. Finally, there's a lot of discussions on technology adoption, capacity development, policy, and regulatory elements to push forward mitigation actions in the country. Yes, can go to the next slide. Now, coming down to electric mobility, I have shared this slide quite a number of times, but it's because I really am impressed by it. I mean, the country has a high share of renewable energy, and these two combinations of electric modes and also a really good share of renewable energy in our national grid makes a lot of sense for the country, makes it a very good case for us in as far as pursuing this as a mitigation action. And also there's a lot of expected economic benefits. And I think this is part of the studies that Mara and the team are also looking at what exactly are the benefits around social and economic benefits of electric modes. And this, I think, will be presented in future studies. So it makes a lot of sense for the country to pursue electric mobility as a key mitigation action based on, one, as I say, the share of renewable energy, and also there's a lot of perceived economic and social benefits to be gotten from it. Yes, next slide, please. Thanks. Yeah, and this is the slide presents assumptions that we used towards what I had alluded to earlier, that electric mobility is is the second highest, offers the second highest mitigation benefit for the country. And the assumptions were roughly around the general understanding that Kenya allows an 8-year lag. You can only bring in a vehicle that has a maximum age of 8 years. So we used assumptions around this to be able to project the potential increase in numbers of electric vehicles. So we have a very detailed report outlining all these key details, and this is something that we could also discuss further with anyone who's interested. Yes, please. So before I jump into the ongoing developments around electric mobility, I think for all those who've been following the climate change discussions in Kenya right now, we just had recently that the process of updating our initial nationally determined contribution. And for those who are new to this, the nationally determined contribution is essentially the target that a country sets based on its own circumstances. To say for this period of time, we will only emit this amount. So Kenya is currently updating its current nationally determined contribution, and the process is expected to end soon. I can't give the exact date, But previously, in the previous nationally determined contribution, we had set a target of reducing about 3.46 million tons of emissions for the transport sector only. We are not certain what the next, seeing issues like electric mobility take center stage, also a key focus on public transport take center stage. So this sort of issues are what we expect to be covered. Ongoing discussions around updating its nationally determined contribution, and with a focus primarily on the transport sector. Now, back to electric mobility, there has been some work that has gone into it. And we were all very happy when we had the budget statement that announced the reduction of excise duty for electric vehicles from 20 to 10%. Also, together with the UN Environment, GIZ, KEBS, the Kenya Bureau of Standards, and also the State Department of Transport worked on adoption of ISO standards on electric mobility, covering safety, covering operational elements, and we have done some summary of what these standards entail. We will publish this soon. There's also been a lot of work from the government side, the policymakers, the decision makers, to engage the private sector to understand what exactly are the issues that are in a way limiting or impeding the uptake of electric mobility in the country. And there's also a lot of private initiatives that are ongoing, which is really good to see that this is happening. Next slide, please. And we have been in discussions, as I said, the Department of Transport identified electric mobility as a key action, and so we thought, what could we do to support the government to push this further? And apart from development of the standards, we've also had a lot of stakeholder engagements, and as well a review of the importation and taxation regime for electric vehicles. For anyone who has gone through this process, you know how challenging it is. And the discussion right now is to see how to make it much more friendlier. And current findings from our study indicate, even with the reduction of excise duty from 20 to 10%, there's really minimal cost on the ultimate price you pay for the car. And this is also something that still needs further discussions to see how to make it a little bit better. Also, review of the vehicle registration system, making it possible to register electric vehicles much easier. I know it's possible right now, but it's mostly on a one-on-one basis. So how to make it a much more smooth process. And finally, as I mentioned, a summary of the electric mobility standards to an assessment of its relevance and whether there is need to do a little bit more around the same. Yeah, so thank you very much. And as I highlighted, there's a lot of work we've done around data, and we understand that data is a prerequisite for successful policy making. And this is why we have engaged a lot of work. So if you just press the next tab, you will see all the, Alexander, you'll see all the research that we've been able to do as far as GIZ is concerned, working on data and improving the situation in the country overall. And with that, I am looking forward to us discussing and engaging further. So the document that has just come to your screen as the last one is an outline of the country's performance as far as climate change related actions in view of the National Climate Change Action Plan are concerned. So this was the 2018-2019 version, and we are currently, together with the State Department, working on the 2020-2019 version, just looking at how far we are coming in as far as meeting our commitments, and also sort of a monitoring on our actions overall. Thank you very much, Mara and team, and I look forward to the discussions.
Thanks, Hermann. So we had some question coming in, and I think before Beryl goes on, I would like to pose one question. So Henry Kamau says 30% contribution of transport to greenhouse gases sounds low. Since Kenya is not an industrialized country with many factories or coal plants, where does the other greenhouse gases come from?
Yeah, you will be surprised. It's actually forestry and agriculture, what is classified as AFOLU. Agriculture, forestry, land use, and land use planning is one of the key emitters in the country, one of the highest emitters in the country overall. Transport actually comes in, I would say, at number 3 as far as the ranking is concerned. Energy is also super low, not so high because, as I mentioned, we are highly renewable energy country. Yes.
Thanks a lot for this question. So if you have more, please put them in the question and answer box. We will go in the discussion after the presentation of Beryl. So Beryl, are you ready for your presentation? So Beryl works for
Yes.
EED Advisory Services, who was the consultant conducting the study that we tendered together with GIZ. Looking forward, Beryl. Floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Mara and the team, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'll be quickly taking us through some of the findings. Definitely, thank you, Hermann, for providing such a deep and profound background to the work that we did. I'll quickly just pull up my screen.
Mara, can you switch off my video for me, please? I'm trying to do it and not.
Trying. Wait, Beryl, does it work for you now?
Not yet, just sharing again.
Sanj, I gave you permission in the practice session. It worked. Okay, now you should be able to share.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
All right, thank you. Once again, the study was focusing on the environmental impact of immobility in Western Kenya, and particularly along the lake region, and that's exactly what we hope to present. But as a way of introduction to who we are, EED is a Pan-African consulting firm, and we offer technical, analytical, and advisory services in three sectors. That's energy, water, and climate change space. So some of the services we offer include market research, data analytics, program project design, strategy development, fund management, among other things. Our current portfolio of clients is a mixture of both development agencies like the World Bank, SNVs. We also have private sector, and then we also have a bit of work with research think tanks, New Climate Institute, the ODI and WRI as part of generally who we serve as clients. Quickly to the subject, already, as I've mentioned, this assessment was particularly on the environmental impacts of adopting e-mobility. And specifically, we were looking at E2-wheelers, so the motorbikes, and then E3-wheelers, the rickshaws or the tuk-tuks, as is very common, and also engine boards. And this was covering 3 counties, that's Siaya, Homa Bay, and Migori. Specifically, what we were trying to do was, one, a fleet assessment, so how many are present in these counties, how many E2-wheelers and 3-wheelers are present in these countries, and then we are looking at GHG modeling to determine the abatement potential. We also looked at charging infrastructure, what policies are there, what's existing on ground, and what's, like some possible recommendations on the way forward. And the final thing that we looked at was policy landscape in terms of preparedness by the country to undertake electric mobility. This was carried out in a 3-step approach. One was a desk review, data collection, and synthesis. So under desk review, we looked at gray literature, peer-reviewed journals, policies, any material that could point us to electric mobility in the country. Some of them, of course, drawing from what GIZ had done previously. Then under data collection, we had KIs and FGDs within the three counties. So that's Migori, Siaya, and Homa Bay. So we spoke to BMUs, and we also spoke to border associations, and also spoke to leaders, key informants within the sector. So those in policy, those who've had experience with battery systems, those already piloting electric mobility in the country. So a vast array of key informants. And the last part, of course, was the data analysis and synthesis. This is collecting both data from literature review as well as primary data collection from the field to produce one report. Now, specifically to fleet assessment and greenhouse gas modeling, and I'll begin with the fleet assessment. As already mentioned by Hermann, there's been quite an increase in the number of motorcycles coming in the country. And as of 2017, the association was reporting that there are about 600,000 commercial borders in the country. And while this is the case, it's very hard to determine the usage of these motorbikes by counties. So whether you get the numbers from, like top down, you'll still realize that they do not break it down into how many go into Kisumu County or Nairobi County. And so we employed both top down and bottom up approach to try and establish the number of fleets in the country. And how we did it is we spoke to the various border associations within the counties, and they gave estimates in terms of the number of members that they have operational. But you see, that's also not conclusive because some people own borders and are not commercial. So there's also the element of private usage, which may not be accounted for within the associations. But also the other element we needed to take care of is the fact that some of these borders are no longer in use. So eventually we combined data from the various groups as well as that from the census, which we found to be very close to the estimates that were given by the Border Association. So in terms of the greenhouse gas modeling, we set a few boundaries to help us in the calculation. One, this accounting only considers three counties, that's Homa Bay, Migori, and Siaya. And so the numbers are not reported for national. Then the accounting, as I've said, the accounting only factors in fleet numbers for the countries within the three counties. So we did not consider, like trans-county traveling where you get people getting from point A to point B in the adjacent counties. The third thing is that we looked at fuel switch or adoption of EVs. We did not do calculations for the entire value chain because you can start by looking at the particular components of this product, try to follow up, the particular components, importation, all those that's needed to come up with the GHG emissions, but rather we narrow it down particularly to if I converted, for instance, a normal or a conventional gasoline motorbike, how much GHG emissions would be associated with that. And the last thing, of course, that we use the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change guidelines to calculate these GHG emissions. So these are some of the findings. And one is that in total, for the three counties, there were about 88,845 two-wheelers. And as I've already mentioned, this is closely related to the numbers reported by the associations, as well as the census data that's available in the latest report that was provided by KNBS. And then we also had 3,063 three-wheelers operating in the three counties. In terms of the total diesel outboard engines, we estimated that that would be about 15,031 boats. And when it comes to boats, this is very specific to motorized boats because there will be a larger number when we just consider the number of boats in the country. But here we were very specific to the diesel outboard engines in the county. And this was estimated through the BMUs as well as related studies that had been conducted in the past. In terms of fuel economy, we found that two-wheelers use an average of 1.6 liters for every 100 kilometers, while three-wheelers use about 3.7 liters per 100 kilometers. Going forward and applying the various formulas that are provided by IPCC, we found that emissions from motorcycles currently is 250,042 tons of CO2. And if you do the compilation for the ratios, you'll find that it's 22,896 tons. I mean, this is quite an amount because these are only 3 counties. And of course, you always give a plus or minus because you will never, or it's pretty hard to just get the exact number of motorcycles in the country. So you can imagine if this was escalated or done to cover 47 counties, then you can see already that the emission is quite significant. And so just to highlight a few things is that this was wheel to tank emissions, as I've already said. It's where you consider the usage or the, like transformation from the normal conventional to electric. In terms of for the fishing vessels, that's for the boats, we got that they actually contribute to 319,732 tons of CO2. So the boat usage is quite high because you find that some of the fishermen take almost 5 days in the lake, 4 nights of fishing, and then they travel inward, which covers a lot of distance. And so their fuel is actually much higher than compared to the motorcycles. And so our assessment, of course, is just limited to the GHG, but there are also additional environmental benefits that could be accrued from using motorized, like cleaner forms of energy for the boats. For instance, the spillages that could come from the diesel engines, among other things. So as you can see, we did 2 scenarios just to see what would happen if perhaps we considered shifting to electrified fleet. So the business as usual shows you that it would almost increase significantly, close to almost 10,000 tons of CO2 if we did not do anything about the fleet that we currently have. However, if you did a shift where we are saying that if you increase the penetration rates by 10% in 2029 and 25%, and then eventually by 50%, you can see that there's definitely going to be a decrease from the previous one, which is at almost 13,000. And so it's already evident that if we can move away from the conventional gasoline into electric mobility, then there's going to be savings, or there's going to be, of course, the environmental benefits where you avoid emissions. So if you look at this, we estimate that up to 5,258,000 tons of CO2 can actually be avoided by just shifting from the base as usual into incremental percentages, because we also understand that you cannot have 100% adoption at a go. So it will be very gradual, moving from maybe 10 to 15 to 20 to 25 across the years. But meaning by 2050, if we can shift this electric fleet, if we can shift the existing fleet into electric, then we will be able to save up to 5 million tons of CO2. And then in terms of policy, what do we find? We found that there's need, of course, there's what's going on, as Hermann had mentioned, but there's still some more work that can be done. And so we believe that there's need for the government to expand EV model availability, and this can be done by incentivizing manufacturers or even offering mandates on production. So for manufacturers, it would be providing, subsidies or tax holidays, or removing excess duty on imports of parts or some materials while mandates, for instance, is where you give them a quota and say, we want you to produce up to 20,000 of electric vehicles or electric bicycles or motorbikes by 2020. So this has actually been adopted in other countries. The second thing that we saw will be required for improved adoption is that we need to improve the cost of competitiveness. And this one also still speaks almost to the first one, because one way is to reduce the import duty on electric 2- and 3-wheelers, issues of registration fee, service tax. Some of these things would be very necessary to increase usage and uptake of this product. Then the other thing is we need to accelerate EV deployment across the public and private fleets. So you'll realize that currently the transport sector is dominated by private investors, but it would be important and to just ensure that they're involved in the process, because if you want to change the whole public transport, then these are the players you need to engage. However, you'll find that at the moment, private users are the ones who are owning most of the EV vehicles. So it's good to have a play of both the public and the private sector in this when it comes to electric mobility. And the fourth thing is we need charging infrastructure. And here we are talking about unifying charging standards and interoperability, such that, say, for instance, OP bus has a charging infrastructure. Can I still charge my vehicle or my electric motorcycle from their side, even if I bought it, from maybe someone like Nopea? So thinking also through on issues of way leave, and also other standards that are required when it comes to infrastructure. When we looked at charging infrastructure and we assessed it, we found that currently it's being driven by private players. So you'll see charging ports in malls or in business areas, and this is purely private. And of course, some other actors like Nopea are already, having their own charging infrastructure. But at the end of the day, what we saw is that it's still private sector led, and the government is yet to build any charging infrastructure. Two, in most countries like India, you'll find that the utilities or the energy suppliers have begun building charging infrastructures. And this is because they already have customer base and large customer base, and they already have a relationship with them. So it becomes very easy for them to simply just, build it out or install into their homes. But when we had a discussion with representatives of Kenya Power, there's generally a lack of capacity at this level to try and establish infrastructure. That means that then it's still going to be quite dominated by the private sector. However, some of the recommendations that we make from our assessment is that it would be useful for us to equip residential buildings and parking spaces with charging infrastructure. And this is because you want to spread out the density. If you have very few charging infrastructure, then the population build up and the demand goes so high, and then you have long lines, which does not necessarily work. But when you put them in residential buildings and parking spaces, it becomes easy because someone can charge their product at night, and in the morning, they're able to use it in the day. But the other thing to take note of, for instance, this is actually happening in China, where they say the next buildings that are being built, at least 10% of them should have, ready to go charging infrastructures for EVs. The other thing is, when we think about charging infrastructure, then the user experience must almost match that they've been getting from, like conventional fuels like gasoline. So then the other way to buy in the people from the other sector, the oil and gas, is probably to retrofit existing networks so that users can have access to charging stations and not be worried about range anxiety. So if my battery is about to go off and the next charging station is 500 kilometers, I get worried because how am I going to get to that destination? Because petrol stations are already spread across the country and well distributed, it becomes easier to just have those stations, and then people don't have to worry about range and if they'll get to the next destination, the next charging station. The other thing that we saw that would be quite useful is swapping stations. And this is especially for electric motorcycles, where you can actually pull out their batteries and just, drop off, leave it charging, take another battery, and you move on to your business as usual. And of course, this is a concern for every border operator, because they're like, will I have to stay at the station and wait for my battery to get full? Or how will I do? Does it have enough capacity to take me through a hill, etc.? Those are some of the questions that we found on ground. But when you think about swapping stations, then there are also things you need to think about in terms of standards. Are the batteries made by, for instance, will they be the same as those that are made by OP-bus? Can we switch batteries? So then you start thinking about standards on forms, on chemical composition, etc. So definitely there'll be need for standards if the swapping stations are to work effectively. To bring this to a conclusion, we had the following to recommend. One is that supporting policies are crucial enablers in creating enabling environment for the EV market. So yes, there's work that's going on, and yes, there's already a reduction in the excess duty, but it's not for electric mobility. And yet it's also not enough if at all we want to grow this market. So the policies will definitely be sort of divided into two. One are those that we can classify as the supply side policies, and this will look at manufacturing and production and anything related to standards and certification that can actually help in terms of availing the products in the market. The second component to this is the demand side policies, which definitely look at schemes or strategies that can enable the ordinary Kenyan to access and utilize this product. So think about reduction on loan interest to enable users to obtain the products. The second thing is definitely setting up of charging infrastructure. And this is also an opportunity for mini-grid developers when you consider electric mobility. And this is because even in the rural areas, some of the areas are not necessarily served by the grid. And so then electric mobility becomes sort of an anchor load or an anchor buyer from the mini grid. So increasing their demand while increasing revenue to themselves. However, for the larger party, because we're just not speaking to the 2- and 3-wheelers only, you'll realize that's going to be need for charging infrastructure to actually catalyze the uptake. And the last thing that we say is that there's need to streamline sectoral coordination. Right now, it's not too clear who's in charge of the electric mobility in Kenya, because you'll talk to NTSA, you'll talk to Ministry of Transport, but there's generally no coordinated efforts. So there'll be need to find a house somewhere where all these processes can actually be actualized. And just to give an example is that we were speaking to one of the operators and they were saying every electric car that comes into the country is classified as Nissan Leaf. Well, that is not true in terms of the model, but that's what exists at the Kenya Revenue Authority. So there's need to, develop guidelines and provide better descriptions, even on the website, drop-down menu, so that you can actually tick and say, this is a different model, it's not a Nissan Leaf, meaning everything that you do is around that particular model, while we have better or newer models that are coming into the country. But generally what we're saying is that they'll need to coordinate what's going on so that one, we don't have overlapping activities, we don't have, like multiple resources being scattered across, while there's definitely one way that we could channel it into. So those are the findings. I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Beryl, and what a rich study. I would please ask questions in the question and answer box. If you want to, you can stop sharing your screen and we can all go on camera. So I have a question from Nico. you talked a lot about charging infrastructure, and he says charging infrastructure is key to accelerate uptake of EVs. Are there any specific targets for the development of charging infrastructure in Kenya or on city level? And if so, what's the current status of development? So you made some interesting recommendations, for example, having like a quota for charging stations in public or new buildings coming up. Do you know if there's any concrete plans, as Nico is asking?
So from our assessment, there isn't any plan yet. I know KPLC was trying to pilot with their own personal fleet, but that's yet to kick out. So no plans. And speaking to representatives from Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority, EPRA, the next steps and what can the government do, but there's not a concrete plan on what's the next step when it comes to charging infrastructure.
Okay, thanks for that. Hermann, do you have an answer for that question with concrete plans from the government as well?
Thanks, Mara. So as far as charging infrastructure is concerned, there is a strategy that was just released recently. It's called the Kenya National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Strategy. And what has been outlined as far as charging infrastructure is concerned, it's revised building codes to incorporate charging station in public buildings and new estates. So this is one of those key targets around electric vehicles and around charging infrastructure. That I think is the closest I have seen any government document target electric vehicles. And also there was another target in the same document with regards to increase the ratio or the share of electric vehicles in the country. I think to around 5% in 2025. I don't have the exact figure, but yes. So that is the closest that we have seen any target related to electric vehicles in the country. Thanks.
Thanks for that response. Sounds exciting that at least like a first step is made. We have another question from Stefan. He says, what do you see as key competitive advantages of electric vehicles versus fossil fuel, independent from institutional support for it to succeed and be accepted in the market? So this touches a bit more on the business model. Hermann, do you want to go first?
Maybe Beryl can go first.
Okay, Beryl.
Okay, I think that the competitive advantage is mostly on the environmental impact and also the range. And this I give based on a conversation we had with OPBUS when we were asking them, consider a border person who earns say at $10 a day, so like 1,000 Kenya shillings. And what is the profit margin that they can take home, for instance? So the increased range, for instance, in the batteries, that they can go longer, for instance, 70 kilometers, is quite higher than what they can currently do. And so you find that the general revenue that they get is much higher if they were to use conventional, because they have done already the estimates. And even as we spoke to them, we saw that. So I guess if we can, in terms of manufacturing, if we can find support from the government where local manufacturing is done, and then we don't have to do, import of fully or completely developed products from outside, then there's definitely going to be a competitive advantage in terms of pricing. So then it goes low and becomes more affordable, and then you have a larger scale of people taking it up because of the low prices. However, if it remains that we will be importing them, and even as you look at the global trends, the prices still remain quite inhibitive. Because I think when we were posing this, we were asking them, are you willing to pay, like 150,000 Kenya shillings to get an electric motorcycle? But they don't, unless it makes sense to them or unless the prices come down, then it's going to be very hard. But in terms of revenue for the end users, it makes a lot of sense. And two, if we can get support in terms of local manufacturing to reduce generally the cost, then there's going to be a price advantage at that point.
Thanks for that. We had some questions coming in on those business models. So I have, for example, one that says a few buildings have charging stations, such as the Holy Family basement parking and Two Rivers. Might you have figures on how much revenue this is generating for them? Let me maybe like have a comment as well, how much charging stations or how much charging costs. So like in the end, you need to consider the price per kilowatt hour. So where do you generate your power from? Is it like the grid, so KPLC, or is it maybe off grid? So what's your investment on hardware, but then as well, of course, as operations. But and there's another question on what are the requirements for an e-vehicle? What can such an e-vehicle cost so that people can pay it? So does any one of you want to touch on the different business models that are out there, as well as sharing economy, to explain what one possibility could be?
Mara, but first I would like to touch on, I think there's a lot of interest on the economic value and the value chain, the economic sense and all that. So just to highlight that one of the key issues we intend to do before our project closes is to do an overall national EV social and economic analysis. I know you're doing that at a regional level, at a county level, but we would like to do something around the same on a national scale, so which will address a lot of these critical issues that are coming up. But so far, there hasn't been any detailed assessment with regards particularly to the question George is asking, particularly for revenue generation from the charging station at the Holy Family Basilica. But yeah, but this is something we're really keen on as a project to pursue. And
so as we're kind of nearing the end, and I see there's like a lot more discussion potential, so like please attend our next sessions, but I would like to give 1 minute closing statement for Hermann and for Beryl, where they maybe can like touch on some points they think have not been there yet. And of course, we are announcing you can read the full study from next week. So that's way more in depth than this webinar can be. So Hermann, what would be your last statement?
Yeah, so just the fact that there's a lot of interest even from the webinars we had independently organized as GIZ, and also I can see a lot of players who are not in those meetings as well. And this sort of interest is what we would like to leverage on as well, to push for much more focus from the government side on how to facilitate uptake of electric vehicles. And as I said, I know my presentation focused more on the environmental climate change related benefits, but we're also looking at seeing how does it trickle down to the value chain. So we're really looking forward to engaging a lot of people. My email is hermann.kwoba@giz.org, so .de. So please reach out and we can talk more. 1 minute or less, that's what I could say for now. Thanks a lot, Mara, for organizing the event.
Thanks, Hermann. So Beryl.
Yeah, thank you so much for organizing the event. I think it's been a rich experience just for us to establish and see the savings in terms of CO2 emissions that could actually be accrued from switching from one type of fuel to another. And I feel like electric mobility has such great potential in Kenya and in Africa at large, mostly because motorcycles are finding application in these countries, right? Both at the rural and the urban level as modes of transport. And so if we can green them, it's better because our grid, yes, is green, but then if we can green our transport sector, then we definitely would be able to avoid a lot of CO2 emissions. But besides the fuel economy, electric mobility has proven that they are better when it comes to maintenance and operations. As Mara said, the report is available. We're also available for any questions. Kindly contact us at EED Advisory, contact@eedadvisory.com. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. So for everyone, we will send a follow-up mail to you with the contact details of the speakers, if it's okay for them to share the data. And as said, you're invited to as well download both the executive summary and as well the full report. Generally, like there's more with the support of GIZ, we have more data generation ongoing, for example, on charging infrastructure, on business modeling and social impact, and as well on training needs analysis, so for vocational training and servicing. So those studies and as well webinars will happen in the next month. So if you're interested, just like sign up, get in touch with me. You have my email address, and we will inform you when we have the next discussion rounds coming up. So thanks a lot for attending today. please get in touch. Have a nice afternoon and have a nice day.